Why China and America are preparing for an AI war. For years, people described the competition between the United States and China as a race. Two runners on parallel tracks, each trying to cross a finish line first. That picture is outdated. What is unfolding now is not a race. It is closer to a slow, deliberate mobilization, the kind nations undertake when they believe a war, or something very close to it, is coming. Only this time, the weapon is not a missile or a warship. It is artificial intelligence. Before we go further, understand something. What you are about to hear right now, most people will never see, because most people scroll past the truth. If you want to be someone who actually understands what is shaping the next 20 years of power on this planet, and not someone who finds out too late, hit subscribe right now. It costs you nothing, it takes 1 second. And it means the next time the world quietly shifts. You hear it here first, before everyone else. Now, to understand why this is happening, you have to look at 5 pressure points at once. The chips that power AI, the factories and machines that make those chips possible, the models that run on top of all of it, the military is racing to weaponize both, and the people, the actual scientists and engineers, being pulled between the two sides. Each one is escalating on its own timeline. And together they are pulling the two most powerful countries on Earth into a rivalry that increasingly looks permanent. Start with the chips, because everything else depends on them. Since 2022, the United States has steadily tightened controls on which semiconductors can be sold to China. It began under the Biden administration, targeting the most advanced processors used to train large AI models. The Trump administration then pushed further, briefly banning even chips that had been designed to comply with the earlier rules, before reversing course a few months later and allowing limited sales to resume. In the spring of 2026, Washington tightened the net again, expanding export licensing requirements to cover Nvidia's most powerful processors and closing a loophole that let Chinese firms buy restricted chips through overseas subsidiaries. By June, the Commerce Department made clear that even foreign subsidiaries of Chinese companies were covered by the restrictions, an attempt to stop chips from slipping through side doors. This back and forth is not just bureaucratic noise. It reflects a real strategic problem for Washington. Advanced chips are the foundation of modern AI, and the United States still leads in producing them. But every restriction also pushes China harder towards self-sufficiency. Huawei is testing a new AI chip aimed at closing the performance gap. Chinese electric vehicle makers are shifting toward domestically designed processors, and Beijing has committed roughly $300 billion over the next 5 years to build out a national network of data centers, so that even if it cannot buy the best hardware from abroad, it can still scale up what it has. But chips do not appear out of nowhere. And this is the part most coverage skips entirely. To make an advanced chip, you need extraordinarily precise machines, the kind that only a handful of companies on the planet can build. One Dutch company in particular makes the lithography equipment that is essential for cutting-edge chip production, and Washington has spent years pressuring allies in Europe and Asia to restrict sales of that equipment to China as well. This is the quiet layer underneath the chip war. It is not just about who can buy the finished processor. It is about who controls the machines that make the machines. And that dependency cuts both ways, because the island that produces the overwhelming majority of the world's most advanced chips sits only 100 miles from mainland China, which is exactly why so much of this rivalry keeps circling back to Taiwan. Even when nobody says the word out loud, that leads to the next battlefield, the models themselves. For a while, the story was simple. American labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google DeepMind were ahead, and Chinese labs like DeepSeek, Alibaba's Quanteam, and Zhipu were playing catch-up. That gap has narrowed. By some measures, leading Chinese open-source models now trail the best American models by only a few months, not years. And Chinese companies are not trying to win the same contest. Instead of chasing the single most powerful model, many are focused on building AI that is cheap enough and good enough to spread everywhere, from small businesses to state infrastructure across the developing world. If the American strategy is to build the smartest possible system, the Chinese strategy, in many cases, is to build the most widely adopted one. Both are forms of power. They just accumulate differently. This is where the word war starts to feel less like exaggeration. Analysts now describe an emerging global split, where countries increasingly align with one AI ecosystem or the other, similar to how the world once divided around competing technology standards or currencies. Whoever's models and chips become the default infrastructure for the rest of the world gains enormous long-term leverage, economically and diplomatically. And there is a human layer underneath this too. Both countries are aggressively recruiting AI talent, offering huge salaries, research funding, and fast-tracked immigration to pull top scientists away from the other side. Some of the most cited AI researchers in the world were trained in Chinese universities and now work at American labs, which means the competition is not only about factories and data centers. It is also a quiet contest over where the smartest people in this field choose to build their careers, which brings us to the most consequential battlefield of all, the military one. Both countries have identified artificial intelligence as a defining factor in future warfare, and both are moving to integrate it as quickly as they can. In the United States, the Pentagon has talked openly about the need for speed, warning that the danger of moving too slowly now outweighs the danger of moving imperfectly. Defense officials have pushed to fold overlapping innovation offices into leaner structures built specifically to accelerate AI adoption. President Trump has proposed a defense budget increase of around 50% for 2027, partly justified by growing concern inside the Pentagon about how fast China is integrating AI into its own military. China's approach looks different but is arguably just as aggressive. Rather than relying on a single dramatic breakthrough, Beijing has spent years building what is often called military-civil fusion, a system where advances made by private tech companies flow directly into military applications with far less friction than in the United States. A Chinese tech firm's commercial AI research can become a defense capability far more quickly than in America, where the same transition often requires new legislation, new contracts, and years of procurement. As one recent analysis put it, China does not need to pass a bill to put its tech sector to work for its military. It simply does. The result is a strange kind of arms race where neither side is clearly winning, but neither side can afford to slow down. Military AI is already reshaping conflicts happening right now, particularly in cyber operations and in the drone warfare scene in Ukraine, where autonomous systems are taking on tasks once reserved for human pilots and operators. Autonomous drones, AI-assisted targeting, and unmanned platforms in the air and at sea are no longer theoretical. They are deployed. Beyond the battlefield, AI is also being used to generate more convincing disinformation, to probe rival networks for weaknesses, and to automate cyber attacks that once required entire teams of specialists. Security researchers have already documented AI models being manipulated to help write malicious code and coordinate attacks at a speed and scale that human hackers alone could never match. And international efforts to regulate lethal autonomous weapons have gone nowhere for over a decade. Even as the technology on the battlefield moves faster every year. So why call this preparation for war, rather than just fierce competition? Because both Washington and Beijing are behaving the way nations behave when they expect a serious confrontation ahead, even if neither wants one and neither may get one. They are stockpiling strategic resources, in this case chips and compute. They are racing to industrialize a new technology before their rival does. They are restructuring their bureaucracies for speed. And they are quietly preparing systems that only make sense in the context of conflict, from cyber weapons to battlefield autonomy. There is an important caveat here, and it is worth sitting with. Some researchers describe the current dynamic as a prisoner's dilemma. Both countries would likely be safer if they slowed down and built in more caution, more testing, more human oversight. But neither trusts the other to do the same, so both keep accelerating, each one telling itself it has no choice but to match the other's pace. That is precisely the logic that has driven arms races throughout history, from nuclear weapons to naval buildups, and it rarely ends with either side feeling secure. Interestingly, even amid all this escalation, the two governments have held quiet talks about AI safety following a meeting between their leaders earlier this year. A reminder that competition and caution are not always mutually exclusive, even between rivals who trust each other very little. What makes this moment different is the sheer scale of investment behind it. The United States alone is projected to pour more than $700 billion into AI in 2026. China's spending, while smaller in absolute terms, is growing fast and increasingly focused on the specific bottlenecks, like chips and data infrastructure, that would matter most in a prolonged standoff. Neither side is spending this kind of money because they expect to relax anytime soon. So is this really a war? Not in the traditional sense, at least not yet. No missiles have been fired over a training cluster. No ships have moved because of a benchmark score. But the language, the spending, the export bans, the military restructuring, the race for talent, and the quiet build-up of autonomous weapons all point toward the same conclusion. Both countries are treating artificial intelligence not simply as a technology to develop, but as a capability to be ready to fight with, or fight over. And history suggests that once two major powers start preparing for a conflict this seriously, the line between preparation and confrontation has a way of getting thinner than anyone expects. That's the picture as it stands today. And if this kind of story matters to you, if you would rather understand the world than be surprised by it, then don't let this be a video you just watched and forgot. Subscribe, because the people who stay ahead of moments like this are always the ones who showed up before it became obvious to everyone else. We'll be here tracking every move. Make sure you're here too. Thanks for watching this briefing. If you want to stay ahead of the next global shift before everyone else hears about it, subscribe now and turn on notifications, so the next story finds you the moment it breaks. This has been Global Brief. We will see you in the next briefing.